You're listening to the 14th source for all geeky nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses, in the episode for Friday, October 22nd, 2021. And I see that your bags are packed, Andrew, as are mine. We got the sunblock on, we got our Bermuda shorts on, and our Hawaiian shirts, because we are going on a news cruise.
Wow. That was commitment right there. Yeah. Commitment. Yeah, no. I mean, really, this is our way of saying, look, there's a lot of little things that we want to mention, but we don't have a lot to say.
Right.
And yeah, but I think there's some interesting things going on that are worth mentioning.
Yeah.
Kind of a follow-up to the many times we've discussed the futility of crypto and non-fungible tokens.
Yeah.
There's a few things that kind of came up in this story. One is just real casual. There's a creator, an artist named Kenny, who I think he's from the Netherlands.
Right.
I forget. He's from a Scandinavian country, but he makes free public domain assets for games. And he kind of had been sharing some discussion about how people that make free and public domain stuff, whether it be art, maps, things, nerd stuff, or basically some of them are convinced that they have to start locking down their material and basically unpublic domaining it, or at least make it less available and accessible, because people are trying to make NFTs out of it.
Right.
Which is, probably what one should expect from NFTs, right? It is just a really epic con job. So the idea that they're actually now just using someone else's shit to further their own shell game is appropriate.
Yeah.
But so I thought it was interesting just that was happening, right? Because we keep hearing about artists selling their art, right? And how that's the cool thing. Yeah. Artists can sell their art and make money. And it's like, yeah. However, we're seeing more and more it's people selling other people's art.
Right.
Whether it be public domain, copyrighted content. But it just kind of further puts that nail in of like, maybe this isn't actually the good thing everyone was pretending it was.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, yeah, ostensibly, it's a place for artists to make money on their art. But the majority... what do you call it? The cash grabbers, for lack of a better word, there are many more of them on these NFT services, these crypto services, than there will be artists ever, right? Because it takes more time and energy and money, in a sense, to make a business out of it for your own, using your own art, than it is just to like, I want to make a quick JPEG, change the color of Sonic here, and put a joint in his mouth and sell that for X amount of Ethereum. Is that one of them?
Ethereum.
Right? And
Ethereum.
And that's the thing, like, it goes back to the conversation we had when we talked about NFTs. Like, it's not really about ownership, it's just about getting as much money from suckers as possible.
Right. That's what it is. It's just what it is.
Right. And
or at best, if you wanted to acknowledge the idea that someone owns something, it's about like being, it's about applying exclusivity to something that didn't have it. Right. It's like if you lived in, what's the stupid metaphor? It's like if, the guy who lives in whatever, the Garden of Eden, and is like, but I own all the fruits.
Right.
Like, wait, well, we all have access to it. I mean, that's digital distribution. Right. We all have access to it. Like, oh no, but I own it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a kind of a fun thing.
Right.
That then also lets us segue into, speaking of people committing fraud and confidence games. No, Steam. Steam, everyone's favorite game distribution platform, recently announced. And by the way, when I say Steam, I mean the company that has trading cards that you get when you buy games that you can trade for other trading cards and even sell on a virtual marketplace
for money.
For money. Yeah, for money. That company has announced that they're going to basically ban any game that uses NFTs as part of the game.
Right.
So apparently there is a level to which even Steam won't sink.
Or just control the market. Only our NFTs are allowed here.
Only our pachinko machines are allowed. Now, comically enough, always one to one up Steam, Epic has actually said, "Oh, we're not going to ban that.
Right.
We think that's totally okay." So there you go. The two kind of big game distribution platforms, two of them anyway, not all the two biggest. I don't want to exclude GOG. I don't know what GOG has said about NFTs.
They got their own problems because CD Projekt Red is just dealing with its own...
its own disaster.
Yeah, PR disasters.
But two of the bigger, game distribution systems or platforms have basically taken very opposite stances on NFTs in gaming on their platform.
I think the announcement from Epic is kind of interesting because I don't know what their personal stance is at all, but I guess their stance is clear. They're allowing NFTs on their platform, but I think it's interesting in the context of the lawsuit they had with Apple of no, we are a free and open platform. We don't discriminate against anything. It's well then, yeah, you gotta allow games that sell NFTs or use NFTs on your platform, whether you like it or not, or else you're the biggest fucking hypocrite on the planet.
Right. So what's the limit on that, right? Oh yeah, we're the free and open platform. We
also sell children.
The snake oil. Right? Which is it is this kind of thing where that's not super comforting, right?
No.
Suddenly Apple's no, we actually try to tailor what's on the marketplace. Now we acknowledge that they were demonstrated to not have done that very well, but actually, can we have some more tailoring of that marketplace, or some narrowing of what's available? I really don't think we need this. So yeah, that's interesting. A little bit of NFT for you. But enough of that, right? I really want to get to the thing that has been, the hotness on my radar, and has been featured in a lot of big articles across kind of nerd news. And this is that Paizo, the company that publishes Starfinder and Pathfinder, they didn't have an announcement last week, but their employees did. So to give a little context, about a month ago, early to mid-September, it was announced, or it was discovered that one of their employees, I believe a customer service manager, was fired, right? And another customer service representative quit. I may have that backwards. It may have been the employee who quit, and then the manager the employee that was fired, the manager that quit. But either way, two people that were kind of well regarded in the customer service side of their house were no longer with the company, and this kind of started a open season on people, especially former freelancers and employees, basically saying hey, this company sucks. Their management sucks. The way they treat their employees is awful. And it happened right before Gen Con, right? Gen Con had been moved to September. So Paizo's basically trying to go to Gen Con to talk about their new shit. And days before it starts, this all just unfurls on the internet, right? People saying you can go read some of these tweets. Some of it is crazy. Things they weren't cleaning the carpet, right? So to the point where years of shit on the carpet, such that employees were having breathing problems, and it's basically employees came on their weekend and cleaned the carpets. That's kind of that's serious, but also minor compared to some of the other things.
Sounds like my first apartment.
Right. So that happened, and it's kind of been this hovering cloud of a lot of fans have been very supportive. A lot of the audience has been we want to see some accountability. We want to see the management of this company say something, do something to mitigate this, because we're all we want to support your product, but not if you're running it like it's a plantation.
Right.
And so last week, about Wednesday or Thursday, there was an announcement made by a group that is basically, it's 30 to 35 employees of Paizo have announced that they have formed a labor union.
Okay.
Paizo Workers United, I believe it is. Right. So they basically, a bunch of them came together and said, we're a union. We are Paizo employees that are now working, that are collaborating together as a union to address our concerns with the leadership of this company. And to provide some context, right? So what's it mean? A bunch of employees say they're a union. Are they a union? Technically, yes. The right, at the time of this recording, and I say that because who knows, it may change in the next couple days. Right. Basically, right now, the next step is that Paizo, the company, either has to acknowledge the union, at which point they now move into a bargaining stage where the union and the management are going to negotiate, or Paizo tries to say they're not a union. And then it has to go to basically of an NLRB vote, the National Labor Relations Board. Right. And which there's some rules about that, and it gets a little bit more complicated. The Paizo union has said that they actually consulted with it was like a communications union. I forget which one it is. So they this isn't just a bunch of people that just said, yeah, we're a union now. Like, they did some research, and this had been in planning for a while. But they announced, we're a union. And just for context, I said 30 to 35 employees. By their estimate, there are 50 union-eligible employees at Paizo. Oh, wow. So that means they have 60 to 70% of the employees have basically signed on.
Oh, wow.
Which, if it goes to an NLRB vote, they need 50% plus one.
Okay.
Which means that, unless, there's always an out, right? There's always, ways that, that employers can fight this kind of thing. But it sounds like there's a union, right? Now, just to add to the story, 2 days later, I think it was revealed that there wasn't just the employees at Paizo that were forming a union, that 40 of their most prominent freelancers, back when the whole Paizo accountability, calling for some response, back when that started, 40 of their freelancers who'd already been interacting with one another basically all started withholding work. Right? They stopped submitting what they were supposed to be submitting. They stopped accepting new tasks. It's a work stoppage, right? And they had a series of kind of expectations of what they wanted to see. But since the union was announced, they said also, if you recognize the union, we'll all come back. Or at least most of them will. So suddenly it's, tabletop role-playing games are built on freelancers. But also they're built on the editors.
Like a lot of publishing, just in general. Yeah.
Right. So it's basically almost everyone is basically hey, union. And the reason why this is important is, first of all, tabletop gaming is notorious for not being a well-paying industry, despite the fact you hear stories about how much money's being made. The people who work in it don't get a lot. Right. And there's actually comparisons. It's at best, if you imagine a writer or an editor for a role-playing game, it's like a technical writer. Right. But instead of getting paid 90 or 100 or 150,000 a year, they're making 30, 40, 50,000 a year. And when you couple that with living in the Seattle area, that's a big deal.
That's where Paizo's based out of?
So Paizo's in Redmond, which is where which is where Microsoft is.
Gotcha.
Wizards of the Coast is in Renton, which is where Boeing is, basically, or at least part of Boeing. Well, no, just some part of Boeing.
Wait, hey, anyway, Andrew, off topic, real quick. What sound does a plane make when it bounces? Boing.
Boing. Yeah.
Moving on.
That's good. That's funny. So the big thing is that this is kind of a first, right? Tabletop gaming hasn't had a union, and quite frankly, gaming, right? This, we've talked about how video games have been trying to organize some union stuff, and here we go. This tabletop gaming company, kind of out of the blue, not only says let's talk about a union, they basically are halfway to 3/4 of the way there. Yeah. So it is kind of a big deal, right? Who knows what's going to happen? Right, Paizo could spend whatever money they have on lawyers. I trust there are plenty of good anti-union lawyers in Seattle. I feel like that's kind of what we're known for now.
Right. No comment.
So it's they may try to fight it. But like, it does kind of raise that question, like, are you going to spend the entire company, treasury on fighting a union that's composed of a majority of the people that make your products,
Right.
supported by the freelancers and a fair amount of your audience,
Right. Which is interesting in the face of video games, and this is less to do with unionization, but similarly related to like the lawsuits we've seen with people like Scarlett Johansson with Marvel, like seeing a large amount of fans. Again, saying with video games, and I would honestly say with like Marvel movies, it seems like a lot of fans in those arenas side with the big conglomerates, going like, you should appreciate that you are part of the Marvel universe, or hey, you know what, a revered game publisher, I can't think of anything aside from EA, which is definitely not one of those, but people siding with the big companies, saying like, oh, I would die to work for them, or I could, I want to be a part of that, and almost belittling or berating, definitely on social media, the people that are standing up against them for fair and equal treatment, right? And payment as well. And so it's nice to see, at least in at least one avenue, you see this a lot with comic books as well, the treatment. Like, actually, I guess I was probably thinking of comic books more than Marvel movies, but like, right. People get upset about like, oh, I want to get paid more. They say, fuck you, you work for Marvel, you live the dream. It's like, well, no, I don't make any money to live. But it's nice to see one pocket of the nerd universe going like, you know what, actually, pay the people what they're worth. Because right. They're the ones making this happen ultimately, right? So that's cool. It's cool.
And to be clear, who knows what's going to happen, right? Because one of the things, as I understand, that is, if once the union is recognized, as I understand the way the negotiation works is they basically, the union gets access to more information collectively about like the state of the company and in terms of that kind of thing. So that it could help them negotiate, but then, there could very well be this reveal that like, actually, this whole business is a house of cards, and if that is the reveal, then that's a conversation that has to be had, right? I mean, people have said for years that gaming, both video games, tabletop games, have been kind of underpriced, right? In terms of the amount of labor that goes into them. Right. Like, when they say like, oh, these video games, they're having $40 of DLC, it's like, well, it's because that's how they have to actually make it work out, right? They can't really keep selling this shit for $50 anymore, or at least some AAA studios can. So it'll be interesting to see if the reveal comes that, hey, this business probably isn't working the way it looks like it's working. Like, it only works this way if you're Wizards of the Coast, right? If you're doing it, international billion-dollar sales. Although who knows with them too, right? Then maybe the reveal there is that long term that's not working very well either,
right?
But it is interesting to see, and I honestly like even the threat of a union. I talk about, I work at Seattle University, and I think I've talked about how they had a big union push when I started back in 2015 for the adjunct professors to have a union, and one of the things that although that the union push ended up getting dropped because of really the election of Donald Trump, the idea that the composition of the NLRB changed such that there was this fear that they didn't want to like have it go forward and fail. But one of the things that like I do, I know I've seen is that there are efforts because of the threat of union,
right?
That there are changes that are made to try to quell that. Right? Like, oh, no, we're not going to treat you that bad. Look, we pay you better than other people do, right? Or something like that, And that is kind of thing. Like, even the threat of the union can be enough to motivate change. I personally, I'd like to see workers have a little bit more authority, a little more power in their life. But even just the idea that, we have to address this union problem could very well be enough to change the way this company, and then therefore hopefully the industry and how it works.
Right.
Although who knows?
Indeed. Speaking of honestly, working in games, I actually want to hop the aisle a little bit and talk briefly about a story that came out this last week in the wake of, and this is not just me being biased here, but like in the wake of the release of Metroid Dread. But I'm actually going to speak ill of the game because Metroid Dread was not developed in-house by Nintendo. It was developed by a company called MercurySteam? Yeah, MercurySteam, a Spanish game developer who actually worked with Nintendo before on the remake of Metroid 2, the original Game Boy game. They made the remake, a 3D remake, but still a 2D side scroller for the 3DS called Metroid: Samus Returns. That led to the development of their development on Metroid Dread, and this is not the first time we've heard about this. This is not new news in any regard, but since the game is in the spotlight, a report through obviously a Spanish language video game website called Vandal, released some information that people who had worked on the game for a relatively the length of time doesn't really matter, that people who were playing the game that had worked for MercurySteam were playing the game, and they saw while playing the game assets they had helped to create or individually created, and yet when they finished the game their names were not in the credits. Which speaks to what we were talking about in terms of just, fair and equitable pay and recognition in game development, whether tabletop or video game. But also the report, and I've heard this before, but the standards for what gets your name in the credits or not is really weird. Quoting from, I'm guessing, a translated version of the article, says that the policy of the studio, and it's interesting that it's on a studio-by-studio basis, states or requires that, and I'm quoting from a website called NintendoLife.com. The policy of the studio requires that anyone must work on the project for at least 25% of the total game development to appear in the final credits. Going on to say that sometimes exceptions are made when making exceptional contributions. And like the first thing that jumps out to me, well, two things jump out at me. It's like, why not just include another name in the credits? Credits for video games are already super long anyway, right? And especially so many games are getting kickstarted, you already get 15 minutes of just Kickstarter rewards where you get like boobs ass 24 on there. Like, why not include some
good old boobs ass 24?
Sorry, I added myself. But then also like 25%, it's not an arbitrary number, like it's a logical number, but like why a number? Like why? What is I'm guessing it might have to do with residuals, maybe, and stuff like that, but still, like, this leads to what I brought up. It's like, honestly, the time amount you spend on a game doesn't really matter. Like, if you're creating assets for a game that are used in levels or used and repeated throughout levels in the game, like, your shit is in there, whether you work there for 10 months or 13. Like, it's a part of the game, and it's just it brings to light just how fucked up the video game industry is, at least with regard to game development and how representation I'm sure, but also just the way that people that work on these games are credited. I think this came up last time I heard about it was in reference to when Red Dead Redemption 2 came out, and considering that had such a long development history and people come and go from that company all the time, people were surprised that their names weren't a part of it, even though because they just missed that cutoff of like they worked there for 12 months, but you need to be there for 13 of the total development. It's like, fuck off.
Yeah, it's surprising, especially, I mean, I think of, God, what was watching some old movie where the credits were like 10 names, right? And then you see any movie nowadays and the credits are like, well, it's like half the movie, right? Which is, I mean, I get it, right? You have all these different people to credit, but it does get kind of silly sometimes, right? Like, it is the breadth of people that they would credit. Sometimes it's like, oh, the guy that brought sandwiches, he's in the credits,
right.
Which is
the assistant to
fine.
The assistant to the star, like they're in the credits, like.
But the idea that those people would be, but then someone who worked on the game or the production for 6 to 8 months, oh, but you weren't there long enough, you didn't have a significant enough contribution. That is weird. Right. That's weird.
Speaking to that, actually, I mean, up until the late 70s, all the credits, maybe the mid 70s, all the credits for movies were at the beginning of the movie, not the end. And I remember asking, as an English major, I was in a bunch of film studies classes as well, and I asked the teacher about that, and the answer was simple: credits got too long, and so they moved them to the end. That was the only reason. It's weird, but speaks to the exact situation we're talking about, like taking time to recognize the people that are involved in making these things that are just beyond the people that maybe are at the, the supervisors of workers, and of course the writers, producers, directors. But because, I mean, if you think about like video games, like how much time does a writer, for some games, does a writer really spend on a project, and yet they're likely credited? Like the value, or at least impact of everybody's on the actual finished product, like, is not equitable to how much time you spent on a game. Like a writer can write the story in the first 10 months of a game, but the game doesn't come out for 3 years. It's like, does that mean the writer is not a part of the game? Like, obviously they are in some shape or form, depending on the game, I guess.
Right.
It's bizarre, and it goes to and it's just even more evidence that like unionization is really needed in this industry in some shape or form. But it's compounded by the fact that it's an overseas developer as well, and I don't know how things work in Spain, but
of course. That is true, but like I don't think it's unique to Spain or anywhere else.
No, yeah. And, like we were talking about, like I was mentioning Rockstar Games at the beginning earlier, like they're an American company, but
I mean, it's, and yeah, this is where my biases are obvious, but like, hey, anyone that's like a producer, especially executive producers, like I'm often like, what did you do? Right? Executive producer credits, as I understand, at least in film and television, are like candy, right? You hand them out to
name
people.
Recognition. That's all it is.
And so it is that thing of, well, maybe they didn't do anything, so why are they in the credits other than because we're putting them there? Where the guy that does work that contributes to the creation of the product maybe doesn't get included. It is a weird thing, and I never. I feel bad because I don't spend a lot of time reading credits.
No,
right?
I mean, most games now you can push start past them, right? Like it's
right. Or that's when you walk off to go to the bathroom.
Right. Until Marvel changed everything when it comes to movies. It's like, no, you got to wait. There's shit at the end. You got to wait.
Right.
But
so it's it almost just feels like a little bit like kind of gross and vengeful.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to include you because you weren't here for the requisite number of hours. And there's always the significant contribution, like something like that always feels like that's it. That's an out.
Right.
So you can say, well, like, that person had a significant contribution.
Right.
Like, well, my art's in the fucking battle with the boss.
Right.
That seems significant,
And I'm not saying it's the right answer, but like there already exists something that a section of credits that you could totally put these people in their names into without any harm or foul. It's literally special thanks, right? A lot of video games and movies as well have a section in their credits dedicated to the production babies, the babies that were born during production. Fuck off.
That guy did not help produce 25% of this film.
That guy shits his pants.
He was a baby.
Yeah.
Well, that's also executive producers, as I understand.
Indeed. Well, I mean, that's how Paizo works, apparently. I'm not sure. Or they just shit on the floor. I'm not sure.
Shits their pants. So, to me, it boils down to the fact that in so many cases with video games, I will give like these role playing games a pass because that's space on a page, right? Yeah. Okay, there is a cost, but like to put another 20 names at the end of your movie or in the credits of your video game, like that cost you nothing.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm guessing a lot of modern tabletop games publish directly to PDF, in which case it's the same situation as like it doesn't cost anything to add an extra page to a PDF, right?
I mean, again, they'll put these fucking Kickstarter names like, and those are always. I'm sorry, I'm in some of them, and they're obnoxious when it's like here is 20 minutes of names scrolling by your screen.
Right.
Half of them are bullshit because it's people on Kickstarter.
Right. Yeah.
So, like you said, boobs
ass 24. Yeah.
Boobs Ass 24 helped contribute to this product, but the artist that did the scenic backgrounds, no, he quit before the line.
He had to get a real job because he couldn't pay for his rent.
Couldn't afford to fucking work here.
Speaking of of what do you call it? Accountability and recognition, and perhaps also, pettiness. But it's a developing story. I don't want to make any judgments here. I was just trying to make a segue. But moving out of the realms of gaming, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about some developing reports that came out of the old Batwoman story, where Ruby Rose, the original actress or actor for what was the name of the character?
Kate
Kane, left the show abruptly at the end of season 1. And at the time, they said that it was, that they just wanted to get out, that, after having to come back to work quickly after an injury, like, they just didn't want that kind of schedule or something like that. It seemed very kind of like it was a professional move. I'm done. I'm kind of either above or beneath the show. I don't know. They didn't want to be a part of the project anymore.
Right. Within
the last week, Ruby Rose posted to Instagram, I believe, to their Instagram stories, telling their side of the story. Let's just call it that. That it was actually a toxic environment. That people were very misbehaved, unprofessional, and toxic. And also, in the hours that the story was released, Warner Brothers or DC Warner or the producers of the show fired back, saying this is all bullshit. We don't know. We don't have any insight here, but it's an interesting story that I bring it up because it seemed like it was done. Everything was explained. What, a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago? What is time anymore, right? But like,
it was probably only like 6 months ago, right? Or a year ago?
Yeah, something like that.
It's because it was at the start of the pandemic, so it was a year and a half ago.
Right, and as the one representative here that I don't know if you watch Batwoman still, but definitely watches the CW shows, like, and in the controversy, in the face of the recasting of Kate Kane, if I'm not mistaken, in the show, not as the main character because they replaced the main character, right? But
they actually did recast Kate Kane,
right? That to have this all come up again, honestly, probably unfortunately, perhaps for a lot of people, made them remember, like, oh yeah, the Batwoman show. I forgot about that. I don't know how well it's doing, but it definitely had left my mind. But I'm not an avid watcher of the DC shows at all. But as a watcher, kind of like, what how do you think they've handled the character of Kate Kane? And if, obviously, any thoughts about this story would be interesting from you.
I don't know if I have anything to say about the show itself. It's fine. It's another CW show. I will say I think the show's better now that Ruby Rose isn't in it.
Right. That was the biggest conversation piece. The people.
I think I've said that on the show that, like, actually I think it's better with her gone.
Yeah.
And I kind of like I when I saw the story, I had kind of mixed feelings because. It's entirely believable that the people that make a TV show are assholes. Like, they're ruthless, they're cruel, and if that's the case, I that should be, let's air some laundry. It also at the same time, part of me is like, okay, maybe I kind of want to wait until someone else like concurs. Just to make sure that Ruby Rose is not just being like on a vengeful streak, right? I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me it's like, obviously the execs are shooting back. I would be more interested to hear, because a lot of the claims that Rose is making is about the work environment, about, I don't know if they talked about fellow actors so much. I have to reread the article, but like, they're definitely talking about stuff that happened on set. And I want to hear
a stunt actor who got third-degree burns and no one cared about them.
Right.
Someone who became a quadriplegic because of a set accident.
Right. And so I want to hear I want to hear it corroborated or contradicted by other actors that were there. The show is not made in a vacuum, right? So I that's why I said at the start of this, like, this is a developing story because as of this recording, it just dropped this morning, but obviously more details will come, and we'll see kind of, and I'm not going to say we're going to find out who's lying or not, because everything's up to interpretation, but if Ruby Rose felt like it was a toxic set and not good for them, I'm glad they got out. Right.
I want to kind of make the point that like it's not that I think that Ruby Rose is necessarily being deceitful, or it's just I think I'm reacting to the fact that I was like I enjoyed the show more after they had left. So I was like, oh wow,
oh man,
like
yeah.
It's almost like I had that instinct of like, well, maybe you're just upset that like the show is better without you.
I know. I remember you sent me clips of the show, or you told me to go look some up, and I'm like, no, they can't be. This is they're pretending to act poorly, right? That's what's going on here, right?
Well, and actually that's Ruby Rose in their statements on Instagram, like actually said like, oh, you all thought I was acting stiff. Oh, it's because of reasons. And so like there is some like legitimate concerns, and some of it is things that like the fact that they were injured while filming. They had a pretty serious injury, right? And so they're saying like, and the production company basically said you have to come back to work right after your surgery, or we're going to fire everyone or something. Which like, and I can believe it, but also I don't know. It just seems like kind of wild. I don't know. What was it? Well, this just happened this week. Kind of out of the blue. I know everyone was like, oh, did you see what Ruby Rose was saying? So we will find out.
Yeah. Speaking of finding stuff out, I think one of the last things we could talk about, and there's really nothing to say. We don't really report. What are we? Are we journalists? We don't really talk about trailers too much because they mean nothing. They're advertising.
I mean, we've talked about trailers in the past.
Indeed.
And we regret it.
We do. But DC Comics has done some interesting advertising opportunities over the last couple of years with the onset of the pandemic, launching last year the DC Fandome. Basically their own version of Comic-Con, but just around, obviously virtual, and where they bring on creators to talk about upcoming projects. They have interviews, and they also release trailers. And we got some sneak peeks and looks at movies that are coming up. We got a brief look at The Flash, or is it just Flash? I'm not sure. And I don't care. Shazam 2, we got like concept art looking at it, but that made me happy. I'm like, oh yeah, Shazam. That was a fun ass movie, right? I'm excited for that. We got a brief look at Black Adam, or Angry Shazam, as I like to call him. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about him. And then we got a full-on, I think they might have still called it a teaser trailer, but a trailer for The Batman. And people were very excited. So it's DC. Reason why I bring up is not necessarily to talk about these trailers. There's not a lot to talk about. Nothing that we haven't really known about before. But it feels like this is like DC Phase 3. Like, okay, no, we're going to get it right this time. Here we go. Let's do this. And we finally, like, these things they've been talking about for years are finally becoming real. And I bring it up to say, like, all right, let's see how it goes. Nothing that I saw I didn't look at all the trailers and stuff, but like nothing I saw looked bad right out of the gate.
I mean, what was the last DC thing that came out?
Was it Wonder Woman 84? No, well, I mean technically Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Zack Snyder's Justice League, right? To me that kind of stands out as like, oof, like the last big DC event was a retcon of your previous movie.
Right. But it did very well for them. As well as it can do when released onto HBO Max and people aren't actually paying for it aside from this subscription fees. I
mean, I watched it.
I have not. It's too long.
And you know what? You're a winner. You won that game.
So
I don't know. I actually didn't realize how many of these trailers had come out because I'm not paying attention. But it's weird because especially when it comes to comic book stuff, we have Marvel that's just been turning the crank on TV, on a few movies here and there, and then you're like, oh, in DC, right? They're not doing anything, are they? Oh no, they're making movies.
Yeah.
Okay. In some cases, right, the Flash movie has been in like this questionable production status for years, right? Like I think it was supposed to come out technically like 3 or 4 years ago, but it kept getting delayed.
Right.
They like had
Change
several directors. Yeah. At some point, they were like not even sure if they're going to bring the kid back, Ezra Miller, because I guess he's kind of a creep.
Aren't we all?
Or something like that. Like, well, I mean, and it's just this, like, this ongoing. So it's like, when I saw it, I was like, oh, wow, I guess they are doing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know?
I think the biggest news...
Good on you for finishing something.
Right. The biggest news about The Flash that I've been hearing about, and what I would argue was really hyped in the trailer, was, of course, the return of Michael Keaton as Bruce Wayne Batman, and they definitely leaned into that in the trailer, as well as the debut, I believe, of Supergirl. And
we think
we're pretty sure.
Sorry, this is because it's a DC movie, so it's dark as shit in the trailer. And I'll admit, I did not realize that
it was a bit of a Where's Waldo in our text messages. It was pretty fun. The one thing that I'm not going to say upset me. I'm not a DC reader by any means, but to call it DC Fandome, and it's like, here's everything that is hot shit for DC in the coming year. Like, it wasn't about comics. I mean, I'm sure they had some comics news in there, but that's not what was being reported on. I don't know if that's DC's fault or it's the media's fault. Not to sound like a boomer, but I was disheartened by one of the co-publisher of DC Comics, Jim Lee, artist. I have a long history with that artist in my mind, but growing up, artist I really liked. But I still like his art. And so he was posting on social media a lot of, like, kind of sketches he was doing in the lead up to DC Fandome of drawings of Aquaman, of Wonder Woman, of the Flash, of Shazam, of Black Adam. But he made it a point, and this is kind of what made me go okay, this isn't about comics anymore, is that he was just drawing likenesses of the actors in their movie costumes. He wasn't drawing the comic book characters. He was drawing the movie characters in comic book style. I'm like, okay. So it, if anything, has shown me that the corporate side of things only views the comics as IP farms. It was that moment. And it's not disheartening necessarily. It's just kind of how things are. Comics aren't money makers, right? But
don't get me started.
I just remembered that too. The whole conversation we had earlier in the week.
We're not going to talk about it, but I've been having a very negative experience trying to buy comic books recently.
Welcome to comic books.
Right, and that's my first and last effort to buy comic books.
We can have Kyron and Taylor on to talk about the whole comic book industry. That's because it's a disaster. But that being said, it's like, yeah, okay, it's all about the other media. We saw trailers for for upcoming movies. We saw trailers for TV shows. We saw trailers for video games. DC Fandome is about everything but comics. And, like, you could probably levy the same argument at Marvel as well at this point. But there still is a comic market. People still love comics. I just would like to see them try to elevate that in these big promotional pushes as much as their movies and video games. But that's a losing fight. So, but
yeah, no, it's interesting to see where the industry goes. And actually, the one thing I will say is that it is kind of weird when I see, like, oh, there's this new Star Wars comic. And I'm like, why are you doing that? like if it's just an IP farm, which is definitely what it feels like, who are you making that for?
Because you hire people to make new characters in your stories that they can use in the movies and TV shows. Oh, you're right.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, you got me. You got me.
Hold on. I'm getting a little seasick on this news cruise. I gotta. You know what? Let's just end this segment. I gotta go. So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post our comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on whatever Facebook decides to call itself in the future.
Yep. We also use other forms of social media. Sometimes they lose service completely, such as Twitter. No, Twitter was fine. It was Instagram. But let's talk about Twitter first, where you can find us at our respective handles, which means Andrew is found at Profound Dark, and you can find me at Bethel. And you can also find us on Instagram, when it works, where you can find Andrew at Profound Brick and me and my work at Bethel Comics.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can take a look at our YouTube page, which you can find by clicking on the link in the corner that says YouTube.
We use the tracks Disco Medusae and District 4 for our show. They're both written and performed by Kevin MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music and more at his website at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 by attribution license.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use, whether it's something like the Apple Podcasts app or Spotify. What would help us out even more, though, would be to go to their storefront and leaving some sort of review, whether a text review or using their proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithm. We hinted at it earlier. You're not going to become a weekly comics purchaser, it sounds like. Oh well. We failed, Taylor. We failed. Oh well. You know what? I wouldn't recommend it.
I mean, just for context, I just want everyone to know. I tried to subscribe. What's it called? Is it subscribe? Is that the word you use to get
it's a pull list or a saver. It depends on the shop you're going to.
Yeah. So I tried to do that to order the entire run of the United States of Captain America. I started it like a week after the first issue came out.
Oh, yeah. You're screwed.
First of all, not knowing that means you can't get the first issue.
If it
which
does
is just
well.
like...
Yeah.
You know, and just that whole process is so like, and now I'm like, well, okay, so I've got issues 2 through 5. All right, yeah. And I haven't read them yet because I just have to go buy the PDF of the first issue so I can at least read the other 4 that I bought.
And I felt bad a little bit because you started texting with me and I'm like, yeah, don't buy floppies, and you're like, but I was trying to support the creators. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. Like, it's vicious. It's a bad industry right now for everybody involved, and we should probably talk about it at some point, because it is something that I need to pay attention to as an independent comic creator, but also because we at this show appreciate the results of the media made from the IP farms that are these comic book series. So, my advice, unless it's an indie comic from someone like Dan Bethel or our lovely friends at Taurus Comics, just don't buy comics. Just joking. Buy comics. Buy the comics you want, whether in trade or floppies or digital. It's all good and all great. It lets the companies and the creators know that you appreciate their work. But the thing is, dear listeners, we appreciate you and your work. So until you support a dying industry, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
So until... That's not the outro I want to say. I was going to say, so until you let us know you appreciate our work. No, fuck that.
Because no one ever will.
Right.
Ingredients: water, organic Vienna malt, malted barley, wheat, hops, yeast.
Meat pops. Lower decks and how it's rad. Do you want to talk about the beginning or the end?
We're not going to talk about that.
Oh,
Nope.
Okay, I'll talk about Metroid Dread then.
No, we don't need to talk about that either.
Okay, fine.
Fighting Nazis is a full-time job.
That's what I hear. You're done being funny?
I was done being funny years ago, but yeah.
I need to stop laughing at my own jokes. It's unprofessional and sad. I'm better at Star Trekking than you.
That's fair.
Boom.